Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Pamela and today we are going to be doing another reading vlog. Today's book that we are reading is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is Haymitch's book. I am so excited to read this. I just finished reading Mockingjay, so I reread the original trilogy in preparation for this book right here. Loved it. Highly recommend. So now I am ready to jump into this one. I do want to just preface this by saying that this is going to be a spoiler review and I will be not always doing live reactions as they're happening, but I will be having like my highlights for part 1, part 2, and part 3, and I will be discussing spoilers. So if you don't want to watch this vlog because of the spoilers, I totally understand. And if you've already read it and want to see my reaction, hi, I'm excited to jump into this journey. I don't know if I will be all smiley and giggly throughout the entire vlog because I've heard this book is pretty intense. I am excited and let's get started. In book 1 and book 2, I made notes. I have my notebooks here of times that Haymitch's games were mentioned, and I made a list just to kind of see how it's set up and how it kind of ties back in, I guess, with the other books. So the first thing that I noted was that we find out in book 1, The Hunger Games, that he outsmarted his opponents. He was the victor of the Second Quarter Quell, a special edition of The Hunger Games. And in this one, the capital requests double the tributes, so 48 instead of 24. And then the question is brought up in The Hunger Games. Did Haymitch stay single on purpose? And then in Catching Fire, we learn who the Mockingjay pin belongs to, and we learn that it was Marge's aunt, and that aunt is one of the tributes that was also nominated in Haymitch's pool of tributes. And we also learn how he outsmarted everybody, the victors and the capital. There was a force field around his, and he learned that whatever you shot at it, shot back at you. So then he used that as he made that force field a weapon. It was not part, at least from what, I don't want to say it wasn't part of the design because we are kind of told it wasn't in Catching Fire. So I'm eager and excited to jump into this book and see what the game makers thought of him doing that. But yeah, that is how he outsmarted the capital and the opponents. I'm going to finish my tea and start reading. Hi guys, so I do have my first update. I am loving this book. So far we have already met people that I didn't know we were going to meet, and we have already learned so much about Haymitch, and honestly, it just kind of makes everything in the Hunger Games that much more sad, because the only thing we truly know about Haymitch in the Hunger Games is that he survives his Hunger Games, and that's about it. We don't really know a lot. So this book is filling in a bunch of blanks I didn't know I had. I already feel kind of emotional about this, and I'm not even 100 pages in. I'm fairly close, but I'm not 100 pages in yet, and we've already had our first casualty. The first few things that we have already learned about Haymitch is that his birthday is actually on the Reaping Day. I did not know that. And we also learned that the Reaping Day is July 4th, which is very symbolic and, you know, all of that if you live in the US. We also get a glimpse of Katniss's dad and her mom and somebody in Peeta's family. I'm not sure exactly who that was. It talks about being a Malark, like the guy being a Malark and a baker. So that was cool. And, you know, I'm sure we're going to hear more about Katniss's dad, but we actually get to meet him because he is Haymitch's best friend. So right now they are in the parade of tributes, and that's kind of up to the point that we're at in the story. We have also already met Plutarch as a young adult. I think he's a young adult. They don't really say his age, but I'm pretty sure he's a young adult. So that was cool to see Plutarch and how he is actually the way I'm seeing it is he's actually kind of helping Haymitch and the tributes from District 12. Haymitch does not like Plutarch. And I mean, granted, Plutarch is from the capital and Haymitch doesn't trust and doesn't like the capital, which, you know, it's understandable. But then knowing what happens in Mockingjay, it's kind of, I'm eager to find out how they become what they become. And another thing that has kind of stood out to me is the wealth of the capital. They are wealthier than all the other districts. However, they're not that wealthy. There are many mentions in the book by Haymitch where he makes observations of like the raggedy curtain and the gymnasium where they take them, how it's like super run down and it needs to like be taken down. Comments like that make me realize that we are not in the capital of the Hunger Games. We are still in the capital after the like closer to the rebellion. And I mean, it makes sense. 50 years from when the rebellion happened, the capital was still not wealthy enough how it was, but the districts were also not as self-sufficient, and apparently like their numbers weren't as high, because the capital that we meet in the 74th Hunger Games, which is what, like 24 years after this, it's a different world entirely. The capital's all lavish and it's all this and that, which it still is lavish in this book, but it's not as lavish as in the Hunger Games. And I thought that was like a cool contrast of like different timelines, you know, like Haymitch's capital is different than Katniss's capital. So far, this book is super entertaining. I am reading it with caution just because I don't trust that my heart isn't going to be shattered at any given point. Like I said, we already encountered a fatality and it sucks. Like, I was starting to grow attached to this character and she's gone. So I'm eager to find out how they're going to continue without her, but it is still heartbreaking, and I am loving the tributes from District 12. The first part so far is very much heavy on the history of Haymitch and kind of where things are at with the districts and the capital. But we also meet Haymitch's love, Lenore Dove. She is feisty. She is a rebel at heart, and she might get in trouble. I mean, she's already gotten in trouble a few times, and honestly, Haymitch got sent to the Hunger Games kind of because he was trying to protect her. Okay, so I'm using a different microphone, so hopefully it's still picking this up. I do also want to point out something that just kind of came up again, and it's about something Haymitch remembers that his dad told Saoirse, I think that's her name. It was a different tribute, and Haymitch's dad said, "Don't let them use you. Don't let them paint their posters with your blood. Not if you can help it." And I think this quote is going to be kind of the equivalent of Peeta's quote of like not wanting the capital to turn him into a monster. I think this is the same. Like, I don't want them to use me for like their benefit. And Haymitch just mentioned something, and I thought it was beautiful. He is running away from the peacekeepers with the body of Luella, which is a District 12 fellow tribute and one of his closest friends, and he doesn't want to hand her body over, or at least he wants to make the capital work for it. And he says, "If this is still being recorded and possibly aired, at least in the capital, maybe it doesn't make a difference if I resist as best I can. Maybe this is where I paint my own poster." So I think that's going to be kind of one of the quotes of like the theme of Haymitch, and I'm here for it. Guys, Haymitch just said the most prophetic thing ever, and this is right after he meets President Snow. He says, "Something steals inside me, and I think, you are on a high horse, mister, and someday someone will knock you off it straight into your grave." And you know what? I'm happy that, I mean, it's sad that it took 25 more years, but I'm happy that not only did Haymitch see it with his own eyes, like Snow getting thrown off his high horse, but he also had a part in it, and it's the best feeling. Haymitch is prophetic. Hi guys, so it's been a few days and I kind of read the book without you guys. The book just started to get more intense, and honestly, I just didn't really want to pause as I was reading, so I just made a lot of notes. And I just kept reading. This video, instead of like a reading vlog, it's kind of just gonna be a reading summary or review with spoilers, because there is so much. Let's just dive right in. So overall, I did finish this yesterday and I did cry. For now, I want to jump back to the part 1 review because that's where I left off. At the end of part 1, we start to see Plutarch's true colors, or like who his true self is, but you still don't trust him. I think Haymitch paused a little bit and he started to kind of question Plutarch a little bit, who Plutarch really stood with. It's on page 104, and it's this dialogue where Plutarch basically just asks Haymitch, why do they submit? Like, why do they keep submitting to the capital? Like, they've had so many instances where they could rebel because they outnumber the capital people and they just keep submitting. You know, it does start to make Haymitch question, like, why am I submitting? Like, why am I not doing anything to like put an end to this, you know? So I think that's kind of where we kind of start to see where alliance comes in, right? Like who he's standing with. We are also introduced to, or reintroduced, I should say, to Beatty. And it's sad. Like all these characters that we are reintroduced to, like as their younger selves, it's sad because, I mean, you know what ends up happening and stuff. But in Beatty's case, it's sad because we learn actually that Ampert, which is one of the tributes, the fellow tributes in this Hunger Games, it's actually his son. Snow put his son in the Hunger Games because he wanted to punish Beatty, and his punishment was to be one of the mentors. So not only does he know the highly probability of his son's outcome, but he also has to mentor his son. But this is where the plot to take down the capital kind of commences, I guess. And I say it with a big smile on my face because, again, I know the ending. I know how Mockingjay ends. For some reason, Haymitch decides to confine in Beatty and asks him, how can I take down the arena? And that gets the ball rolling. Beatty's kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about, but this produces electricity and you might need electricity, and electricity can do a lot of harm. And, you know, like that kind of conversation. And that's when Haymitch realizes that he does have to team up with Ampert so that they could potentially do something. This is when all those districts start to kind of combine and they form an alliance, and they call themselves the Newcomers. So the Newcomers are basically the majority of the districts, and then the Careers and District 4, I believe, are the ones that stick together. This is where I guess it was kind of the first alliance of the non-careers was during Haymitch's games. This is also where Haymitch also you start to see that shift in him, and he starts to see like how he's starting to feel like he has a purpose, right? Like this plan that he's working out with Ampert and Beatty. But in true Suzanne Collins, this first part of the book ends with a shocker, and that is that earlier on, Luella McCoy dies. What does Snow do? Obviously hides it, and he presents Haymitch with a gift. And this gift is a body double of Luella. And right away, Haymitch could tell, obviously it's not her, it's a body double, but something is wrong with her because she's only repeating her name, I believe how old she is, and what district she comes from. Haymitch and the rest of the District 12 tributes, they realize that this new Luella, which they call her Lulu, it's also not her choice to be there, and she didn't have a say in what's happening, so they can't be mad at her, but they also can't trust her because, one, it's clear that they have tortured her, so she doesn't really remember who she is. She also has something in her ear that when she says the wrong thing, she gets reprimanded for, and the way of doing that is they do this really loud, high-pitched noise that makes her ears bleed. They realize they can't trust her because if there's an earpiece and they can hear what she said wrong and, you know, reprimand her, then that they must be listening whenever she's around. And they also realize that when they truly lose control of her, she like passes out, but they realize that she might have a medical implant or something to where it's releasing something into her. So she might just be drugged too. But yeah, that's how part 1 ends, is with this present. And now let's deep dive into part 2. So in part 2, this is where the plan drown the brain of the arena solidifies. The mentors, Mags and Wyrus, they help Beatty. They pretty much cut off the electricity, and then Beatty's able to sneak in and talk to Haymitch and kind of tell him what the plan is going to be. And they agree to it, and it's placed into effect. And it's confirmed that the only ones that know about this is Amber, Haymitch, and Beatty. Obviously in Mags and Wirus. From the tributes, it's only going to be Haymitch and Amber. That's it. So then they go into the final like private, I forgot what it's called, but it's where they show off their skills privately. Haymitch scores a 1. It is the first one in history because he was just a smart aleck about what he said in there pretty much, and that got him a 1. I think it was a 1 because they knew that if they gave him a 1, sponsors wouldn't sponsor him and it would be very, very hard. But I believe it's Mags who kind of mentioned how like it's actually a good thing he got ranked a 1 in a way, because that really made him stand out. Because this, again, this in this year's reaping, they reaped 48 kids instead of 24. So getting a 1 really highlighted him and made him at this point now unforgettable. For better or for worse, there's a spotlight on him now. So he kind of starts to own it. You know, he's like, okay, fine, I got a 1. And then they proceed to the final interviews with Caesar. The interviews proved to be really bad for the careers actually, and it started with District 1. Panache makes a fool of himself and he makes a joke about being the meat, like being all meat like muscle, and Caesar runs with it. And from there it just goes downhill. The careers come off as dumb, like they're only all muscle, no brain, and that actually helped the newcomers because they came off as the brains that they were, and they owned those interviews. They owned the night. And I do want to read a part of what Caesar told Panache about the whole meat thing because it was funny, but then Haymitch's realization after is what got me. This is Caesar saying, I think brain matters quite a bit. The capital citizens lose it, and so do I, until I remember the joke's not just on Panache. It's on all of us, stupid, clawed district piglets, animals for their entertainment, expendable for their pleasure, too dumb to deserve to live. And honestly, if that does not describe the Hunger Games, I don't know what does, honestly. And then in the last, I would say, chapter or 2 chapters of the second part of the book, we really solidify where Plutarch's loyalties stand, because he kind of brings District 12 over mainly just for Haymitch to do like another photo shoot because their first one kind of wasn't good. This is all just so that Haymitch could also have a private call with his love. I don't know. I found it sweet. It's a little bit heartbreaking because you find out why they can have the conversation, and it's because Leonore got mad. She's saying she gathered a lot of people and they kind of started to rebel in the district, so she got arrested. That's how they were able to set this up. But we learned that she's about to be released the next day. So Haymitch is like, all right, cool. It sucks. You shouldn't probably be doing that, but okay, cool. But they get to have this conversation and it's like their final goodbye. Haymitch realizes that Plutarch did this so that he could trust him, but Haymitch is not a trusting person. So he acknowledges it and still kind of lets him know, like, but I still don't fully trust you. And this is when Plutarch gives him very, very, very valuable information about the arena that he overheard. And he tells Haymitch, like, you decide once you're in the arena, but this is what I know. This information will help you. And, you know, once you're in the arena, you make up your mind if you're going to trust me or not. And part 2 ends with Haymitch and the rest of the tributes in the arena. And Haymitch quickly realizes also that he cannot trust anything in the arena because everything in the arena is poison, including the water, the fruits that are abundantly growing on all these trees. In part 3, this is where everything goes down. The execution of the plan, the deaths of the tributes, and the one that finally wins. As much as I want to talk about everything and every single little detail of the book, because there was so much, I am not going to, just because although this is a spoiler video, I do want you guys to experience it if you read it for the first time. It's so heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's so powerful. So I'm just gonna kind of go over like major points that stood out to me in part 3. The first one is that the plan to blow up or to drown the brain of the arena, it works, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't. It does kind of throw things off balance, and there is kind of like this, I would consider it like an earthquake that happens, and certain things start to malfunction, and you know, there's glitches in the arena, but at the end, they end up getting control of it again, and they start up the generator and things continue. There's just so much lead up to it that when it when it actually goes off, you're like, yay, but then you realize quickly that it didn't really work. And it's just so demoralizing, like for Haymitch, but also as the reader. I mean, again, we're in his brain as he's narrating the story, but you also feel it. Like you feel so sad and defeated. And I don't know, like I was sad reading it, but at the same time, I think it just goes to show Suzanne Collins' writing and how she can like make you feel all these things, right, as the reader. And at the end, there's only Haymitch and one of the District 4 tributes that had partnered with the couriers, and he did use the force field to his advantage because there was a force field protecting the generator, and he discovered that right before Mace Lee dies. He did use it to his advantage, but it was more of like just the way that things happened that ended up protecting him, and that's kind of how he won. But the point is that he did not die, you know, like that was the reason why he won, because they were both injured, and it just came down to who bled out first and who died first, because Haymitch was on his deathbed when he won. And I chuckled a little bit because it reminded me of when he told Peeta, like, his advice to winning the games was to not die. It makes sense. Like, I know he was being a little bit sarcastic to Peeta, but now I also kind of understand why he said that, is because he literally did not die first. After he wins his games, he is flown to the capital. This is where there's also, again, that contrast that I had mentioned at the beginning of the book of, like, the games back in the day to the games in the Hunger Games. He was taken back to the apartment where they had been for training, and he was just given bread and milk. Granted, it was probably a punishment from Snow in some way, like not to give him everything and just to keep it to the minimum. He wasn't even given clean clothes at the beginning. It was still dirty clothes until he was all like healed. That's when his prep team came back and they kind of fixed him up, I guess, like appearance wise. And he goes to like the fancy dinners and like the parties and stuff in the capital. But they also have him caged. He's like an animal in a golden cage, and people are feeding him, and it's just really sad. And I think it highlights more how they did view them as just plain animals and not humans. Although he had won the Hunger Games, he was still in a cage. That's kind of when he also starts to realize that he's never going to be out of the games anymore. He is one of Snow's playthings. He comes to that realization, kind of how he had that wake-up call conversation with Katniss of just because the cameras aren't technically there, it doesn't mean they're still not playing the game, you know? He realizes that then, that he's always forever going to be part of the games, because every year on his birthday, they're going to deliver 2 new tributes to his door for him to train. And then at the end of these parties that Haymitch is at, President Snow whispers at him, "Have fun at your homecoming in District 12. Right away, Haymitch senses something is off. When he's on the train waiting to go back, he realizes they haven't really left the station, so he asks why. And that's when they let him know that they are waiting on the bodies of the other 3 tributes from District 12. So not only did the capital not send the bodies back to their district when they died in the arena, but they waited until the end, and he had a ride with decomposing bodies. Snow is just the worst person in the series. And when they arrive to the station in District 12, nobody is there to greet him. One, because they arrived in the wee hours of the morning. Second, he realizes when he's walking home that a tragedy is happening. This is where he loses his mom and his brother. It's just so sad. I don't want to get emotional like talking about it, but it's just so sad how he loses them. It's very tragic. At first, the people don't realize that he's home until like they see him trying to get into the fire. And people are kind of also freaked out about him because I guess he describes he was just a wild person, you know, because, you know, he was seeing his life burn down pretty much in front of him. So Katniss's dad ends up pulling him out of the fire and tells him like it's too late, and they kind of pin him down, and that's kind of the end of that. And they bury all of them. They have their ceremony, and his love, he finds out that Lenore is still imprisoned. She was not let go the next day. But her hearing is that evening, but they encourage him not to go because he might aggravate things. So he doesn't go. And the next morning he goes to their meeting place, and we find out that she has been released on house arrest, but she wants to stop by to get some fresh air. I don't think she realized he was there. So they have their encounter and it's beautiful, but that's also the end of her line because, again, Snow is horrible. He plants something that looks like her favorite candy and Haymitch feeds it to her. And then after the first, well, she had already swallowed the first one. And as she's trying the second one, they realize that it's poison. So yeah, that's how she dies. He fed her poison. So that was sad. That was heartbreaking. His last words to her were that she made him promise that he was not going to let the sun rise on the reaping, because, his saying was that the sun always, the sun was always going to rise. And she kept saying that it shouldn't on the reaping, because that's like a dark day. And basically that promise was to end the Hunger Games, so she makes him promise her that, and he does, and that's when she passes, and that's when Haymitch starts losing it. He starts drinking like sleeping syrup so that he doesn't have to remember, but then he starts having nightmares of feeding her the poison and everything. It's just so sad. It's so heartbreaking, and you feel for Haymitch and you fully understand why he is the way that he is. And that's where the book ends. And I think it's important that it ended there, because then as the reader, there's so much going on, at least in my head, of I had just finished reading the original trilogy of the Hunger Games, or rereading it, and all of that is fresh in my head. Reading this, it was so powerful because you realize that, Haymitch fulfilled that promise. He had a big part in ending the Hunger Games and overthrowing the Capitol. But honestly, on that same note, that's why this book, I think, again, in my opinion, it's so emotional, because you get to connect with all these people and you get to know their hearts and their desires for a better future. And you get to know all the people that came before Katniss and Peeta, and before this final rebellion happens in the Hunger Games trilogy. You really get to know these characters. And again, Mags, Wiress, Beetee, Plutarch, you and Haymitch now, you get to know their hearts and really know how they this revolution started when they were young themselves, and how their whole life they worked up, to this point. And then here comes Katniss and Peeta and they do it, so I don't know. It's a great book. It also makes everybody who dies, their deaths a little bit more bearable, is knowing that they died for a purpose that they believed in, but that purpose was fulfilled many years down the line. And then Plutarch, Beetee, Haymitch, they all got to see this actually happen. It was in their lifetime. And I thought that was so beautiful. And yeah, so Haymitch keeps his promise. Then there's an epilogue, and that just sealed the deal for me. That is when I started crying. It picks up where Mockingjays epilogue ends. So the reason why this book was written through Haymitch was because Katniss she wanted to make this book of, of what truly happened and stuff, because then there were so many people we didn't know about, and she wanted to make it a point to know everybody's story, to honor them and their memory and their legacy. So that's why Haymitch started writing this book. He states he didn't want to do it, but he did it because once he brought up one thing, everything just kind of came out. And then it ends with Haymitch stating that he was able to keep his promise to Lenore, and there will no longer be a sunrise on the reaping because there's no more reaping. there's no more Hunger Games. And it was just so beautiful. Katniss gives him some goose, which if you read the book, you'll understand how that's meaningful. And it's just so beautiful. And like, you see a different side of Haymitch, of like, I don't want to say a healed Haymitch, but in a way, like, he's fulfilled, right? Like, his purpose is fulfilled. His purpose was the promise that he made. It's fulfilled. And now he even states like he knows his end is coming soon, but he's enjoying the time he has left. And there's just this peace about him, and it's just so beautiful. Like, I highly recommend this book. And it also answers my question from the beginning of like, if what we like, the clues of his games that we learned in like Catching Fire and stuff, like, were like legit. And like, the answer is yes and no. Katniss and Peeta were shown the Capitol's version of the games. And ultimately, we find out that the Capitol's version of the games had everything edited out. All his rebellion was edited out. They just made him look like this stuck-up loner kid that went rogue, pretty much. Nothing is shown. Maiseli's rebellion isn't shown. Amperance isn't shown. Like, none of it is shown. So, at the end of the day, after reading the first trilogy, all we know is that he wins. Obviously, because he's alive and he's a victor. But that's all we know. We know nothing because everything that was described in this book was edited out of the Capitol's version of that year's Hunger Games. So, to answer my own questions, yes, certain things happened, but certain things didn't happen the way that it was described. And some things, a lot of things, were just not shown. So if you're considering picking up this book, I highly recommend it. If you haven't read The Hunger Games in a while, I highly suggest that you read the first trilogy and then you pick this one up. I kind of want to reread the trilogy again. I'm not going to do it this year, but I might reread it again next year, now knowing what I know from this book, and see how my opinion changes. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Sunrise on the Reaping. I highly recommend this book. Your heart will be broken, but honestly, I feel like the heartbreak is worth it because we know what happens in the first trilogy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts. Let me know on anything that I missed or might have missed. Let's have a discussion in the comments about it. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.